Hi everyone, welcome back. We've got a brand new story to share with you, so let's begin. My name is Damien. The old iPhone I found buried in a shoebox in our garage on a quiet Saturday afternoon contained the truth about my marriage in text messages that my wife thought I would never see. What I discovered when I charged that faulty, forgotten phone and read through months of conversations between her and her best friend didn't just end our marriage. It revealed that the woman I had been living with for 8 years had been living a completely different life than the one I thought we shared. On the surface, our marriage had seemed stable in all the unremarkable ways that long-term relationships often become. Veronica and I had been married for 8 years, together for 10, and had settled into the kind of comfortable routines that I had assumed represented mature love rather than the passionate intensity of our early years together. We shared household expenses, took turns cooking dinner, watched television together most evenings, and maintained the kind of domestic partnership that seemed sustainable and appropriate for people in their mid-30s. Our relationship wasn't fiery or particularly romantic anymore, but I had attributed that to the natural evolution that occurs when couples move from the excitement of new love to the deeper satisfaction of building a life together. Veronica and I rarely fought about serious issues, managed our finances responsibly, and seemed to share similar goals about career advancement, homeownership, and the general direction we wanted our lives to take. But looking back now, I can see that what I had interpreted as comfortable stability was actually emotional distance that had been growing between us for months without my conscious awareness. Veronica had been staying out later with friends more frequently, claiming work obligations with social commitments that right now never made sense. Our physical intimacy had declined gradually but noticeably, with Veronica always having reasonable explanations about fatigue, stress, or simply not being in the mood. I had rationalized these changes as normal adjustments that married couples experience as they navigate career pressures, family obligations, and the routine demands of daily life. Veronica's job as a marketing manager had become more demanding over the past year, requiring longer hours and more travel than her previous position, and I had assumed that these professional pressures were affecting her availability and energy for our relationship. The discovery that would shatter my understanding of our marriage came during what should have been a routine weekend project. Veronica had gone to visit her parents for the weekend because of a family emergency, a trip that had become more frequent lately because of her mother's deteriorating health. I had decided to use the time alone to finally tackle the garage organization project that I had been postponing for months. Our garage had become a repository for boxes of old belongings, seasonal decorations, and miscellaneous items that we had been meaning to sort through and either keep, donate, or throw away. Veronica and I had accumulated these boxes over years of moves and life transitions, which always seemed less urgent than whatever else was happening in our lives. I had been working through the boxes systematically for about an hour, creating piles for different categories of items, when I opened a shoebox that I expected to contain old documents or photographs. Instead, I found an iPhone that I immediately recognized. The phone was my wife's old iPhone, and it was completely dead when I found it. I recalled it was faulty then, before it got replaced, but I was mildly curious if the phone would come up and what photos or information it might contain before I discard it. I found a compatible charging cable in the same box and plugged the phone into an outlet in the garage, expecting that it might take a while to charge enough to power on after sitting unused for what was apparently an extended period. I continued sorting through other boxes while the phone charged, occasionally checking to see if it had accumulated enough power to boot up. After about an hour, the phone had charged sufficiently to turn on, and I was pleased to see that it wasn't password protected or locked in a way that would prevent me from accessing its contents. I had hoped to find old photos of Veronica and me from earlier in our relationship, or perhaps messages and documents that might be worth preserving as mementos of our shared history. The phone's photo gallery did contain some pictures from what appeared to be several years earlier, including images from trips we had taken together and social gatherings with friends that brought back positive memories of happier times in our relationship. But as I continued exploring the phone's contents, I noticed that the Messages app showed recent activity. I guessed my wife was still using the same iCloud account. Curious, I opened the Messages app and began scrolling through the conversation threads. What I found in those message threads changed everything I thought I knew about my wife, our marriage, and the life we had been building together for nearly a decade. I found conversations between Veronica and her best friend. Conversations that revealed a version of Veronica's thoughts and feelings that bore no resemblance to the woman I thought I was married to. In these messages, Veronica complained extensively about our marriage, describing me in terms that were not just unflattering, but actively contemptuous. She characterized me as boring, predictable, and sexually unsatisfying, comparing me unfavorably to other men she encountered through work and social situations. Veronica expressed frustration with our lifestyle, our financial situation, and virtually every aspect of our shared life together. But the complaints about our marriage were just the beginning of what I discovered in those text conversations. As I continued reading through months of messages, I found evidence of something far more devastating than general marital dissatisfaction. Veronica had been having an affair with a mutual friend who was married to someone we socialized with regularly, and the affair had been ongoing for at least 6 months based on the message timestamps. The messages between Veronica and her best friend contained explicit discussions about Veronica's sexual relationship with this mutual male friend, detailed planning for their secret meetings, and strategies for concealing their affair from both of their spouses. Veronica described their encounters with enthusiasm and passion that she had never expressed about our relationship, even during our early years together, when I had believed we were deeply connected physically and emotionally. Reading these messages felt like discovering that the person I had been living with was a complete stranger who had been performing the role of my wife while conducting an entirely different emotional and physical life with someone else. The contrast between the affectionate, committed partner Veronica appeared to be when we were together, and the dissatisfied, unfaithful woman revealed in her private communications was so stark that I had difficulty accepting that they were the same person. My physical reaction to these discoveries was immediate and intense. As I read through message after message that detailed Veronica's deception and contempt, I felt a tightness in my chest that made it difficult to breathe normally. I found myself reading certain particularly devastating messages multiple times, as if repetition might somehow reveal that I had misunderstood their significance. The most painful aspect of these revelations wasn't just learning about Veronica's affair, but understanding how little respect she had for me as a person and as her husband. In her messages to her best friend, Veronica ridiculed my efforts to maintain our relationship, mocked my attempts at romance and intimacy, and expressed resentment about having to pretend to be satisfied with our marriage when she was getting her real emotional and physical needs met elsewhere. Veronica had been living a double life with a level of sophistication and calculation that suggested she had no intention of ending either relationship. She wanted to maintain the financial security and social respectability that our marriage provided while pursuing passion and excitement with another man, and she had been successfully managing both relationships for months without either the man's wife or me suspecting what was happening. As I continued reading through the messages, I began taking screenshots of the most damaging conversations, partly as evidence of what I had discovered, and partly because I was having difficulty processing the full scope of Veronica's deception. The messages painted a picture of someone who had been actively deceiving me while feeling no apparent guilt or conflict about her dishonesty. I thought about confronting Veronica immediately before she returned from her trip on Sunday, but I decided to take time to process what I had learned and determine how I wanted to respond to discoveries that had fundamentally changed my understanding of our marriage and my wife's character. The rational part of my mind understood that our marriage was effectively over, but I needed time to move beyond the initial shock and emotional devastation to figure out how to handle the practical and legal aspects of ending our relationship. But I also wanted Veronica to understand that her deception had been discovered and that the careful compartmentalization she had maintained between her public marriage and her private affair was now completely exposed. I wanted her to face the reality of what she had done and said without being able to minimize, rationalize, or deny the evidence of her betrayal. The idea of simply printing out the most damaging text conversations and confronting Veronica with physical evidence of her own words seemed like the most effective way to make her understand that her deception had been completely exposed. Unlike a verbal confrontation, where she might attempt to deny, minimize, or explain away her actions, printed copies of her actual text messages would provide undeniable proof of what she had been doing and thinking. I spent Sunday evening carefully selecting the most revealing and damaging messages from months of conversations, focusing on texts that showed the scope of her affair, her contempt for our marriage, and her detailed planning to continue deceiving me indefinitely. I printed multiple copies of these conversations, organizing them chronologically to create a comprehensive record of Veronica's betrayal and deception. The process of reading through these messages again while selecting which ones to print was emotionally exhausting, but it also helped me move from shock and disbelief to a kind of calm determination about what needed to happen next. Veronica had made calculated decisions about our marriage and her affair, and now she would have to face the consequences of those decisions without being able to control the narrative or manage my reaction. On Sunday morning, before Veronica arrived from her trip, I began systematically posting the printed text conversations throughout our house in locations where she would see them immediately upon returning home. I taped messages to the refrigerator, the bathroom mirror, the television screen, and the bedroom door, creating a comprehensive display of her own words that would be impossible to ignore or avoid. The experience of hanging up evidence of my wife's betrayal in our shared living space was surreal and deeply painful, but it also felt like an appropriate response to the scope of her deception. Veronica had been conducting her affair in the spaces and relationships that were supposed to be sacred to our marriage, and now the evidence of that betrayal would occupy those same spaces until she was forced to acknowledge what she had done. After completing this silent confrontation, I packed a bag with clothes and essential items and left our house to stay with a friend, whom I trusted to provide emotional support without judgment during what I knew would be an extremely difficult period. I left no note or explanation for Veronica, wanting her to discover the printed messages and understand their significance without any commentary or interpretation from me. My friend was shocked when I explained what I had discovered and how I had chosen to respond, but he supported my decision to take time away from the situation before making any permanent decisions about my marriage. He offered his guest room for as long as I needed it and helped me think through the practical and legal steps I would need to take if I decided to pursue divorce. Veronica's reaction to discovering the printed text messages was immediate and intense. She began calling and texting me within hours of returning home, progressing quickly from denial and confusion to panic and desperate attempts at damage control. Her initial messages claimed that I had misunderstood the context of her conversations with Carmen, and that the text messages didn't accurately represent her true feelings about our marriage. But as it became clear that I wasn't going to respond to her calls or texts, Veronica's messages became increasingly desperate and emotional. She admitted to having feelings for her affair partner, but claimed that they had never acted on those feelings physically. She insisted that her complaints about our marriage to her best friend were just venting frustrations that every married person experiences, and that they didn't reflect her real commitment to our relationship. As the week progressed, and I maintained complete silence, Veronica's messages became more honest about what had actually happened while becoming more desperate about the possibility of losing our marriage. She admitted to having an affair with the guy, but characterized it as a mistake that meant nothing to her, and that she was willing to end it immediately if I would come home and work on our relationship. Veronica's final messages of the week contained increasingly frantic promises about changes she would make to save our marriage, including ending her friendship with her best friend, avoiding contact with her affair partner, and agreeing to couples counseling or any other interventions I thought might help us rebuild our relationship. But throughout this week of increasingly desperate communication from Veronica, I maintained complete silence, never responding to her calls or texts or giving her any indication of what I was thinking or planning to do about our marriage. The attorney had advised me that the text messages I had discovered would provide strong evidence for divorce proceedings and would likely protect me from having to pay spousal support to someone who had betrayed our marriage so deliberately. When I returned to our house the following Saturday afternoon, the contrast between the space I had left and the space I found was stark and telling. All of the printed text messages had been removed from the walls and surfaces where I had posted them, and I could see evidence that some had been crumpled or torn in what must have been an emotional reaction to discovering them. Veronica was in the living room when I entered, and her appearance suggested that she had not been sleeping or taking care of herself during the week I had been gone. Her eyes were swollen from crying, her hair was unkempt, and she looked like someone who had been living in crisis mode since discovering that her carefully maintained deception had been completely exposed. When Veronica saw me, she immediately broke down and began her desperate apology and pleading that I had been expecting but was no longer interested in hearing. She cried and begged me not to end our marriage, promising that she would do anything to repair the damage she had caused and rebuild the trust she had destroyed through her affair and deception. But I remained calm and emotionally detached during this encounter, having already moved beyond the point where Veronica's tears or promises could affect my decision about our future. I told her simply that I hadn't come back to argue or negotiate about our marriage, but only to collect my belongings and move forward with ending our relationship. I explained to Veronica that she had already told me everything I needed to know about her feelings toward me and our marriage through the text messages I had discovered, and that her current distress about losing our relationship couldn't undo months of deliberate deception and betrayal. The woman who had described me with such contempt in her private communications and who had been planning to continue her affair indefinitely didn't suddenly become someone I could trust or build a future with. Veronica's reaction to my calm finality was more tears and increasingly desperate attempts to convince me that the person revealed in those text messages wasn't who she really was, and that the affair with her affair partner had been an aberration that didn't reflect her true feelings about our marriage. She begged me to give her a chance to prove that she could be the wife I deserved and that we could rebuild our relationship stronger than it had been before. But I had already seen enough evidence of who Veronica really was when she thought her actions and words would remain private and consequence-free. The months of detailed planning for her affair, the contemptuous discussions about our marriage, and the sophisticated strategies for deceiving me indefinitely weren't momentary lapses in judgment. They were evidence of character traits and values that were incompatible with marriage or any other committed relationship. I spent that afternoon packing my remaining clothes, personal items, and important documents while Veronica continued trying to convince me to reconsider my decision about divorce. But I had already emotionally detached from our marriage and was focused on the practical tasks of separating our lives and moving forward independently. Before leaving the house for the final time, I gave Veronica the divorce papers that my lawyer had prepared, explaining that she could work with her own attorney to negotiate the practical aspects of ending our marriage, but that my decision about the relationship itself was final and non-negotiable. The divorce proceedings took approximately 6 months to complete, during which Veronica made periodic attempts to convince me to reconcile, despite the ongoing legal process to dissolve our marriage. She would send occasional texts or emails expressing regret about her affair and asking if we could meet to discuss giving our relationship another chance. But I maintained the same emotional distance during the divorce process that I had established when I first discovered the text messages, understanding that any communication with Veronica beyond what was necessary for legal proceedings would only encourage her false hope that our marriage could be salvaged. The division of our shared assets was relatively straightforward since we had no children and had maintained largely separate financial accounts throughout our marriage. Veronica received a portion of the equity in our house and her portion of our shared savings, but she was not awarded spousal support due to the evidence of adultery and the relatively short duration of our marriage. Veronica's relationship with her affair partner ended shortly after I filed for divorce, apparently because the excitement and secrecy that had fueled their affair couldn't survive the exposure and practical complications that followed the discovery of their relationship. Both Veronica and the man found themselves dealing with the consequences of their choices without the support system they had been providing for each other. After our divorce was finalized, Veronica made a few attempts to maintain some kind of friendship or ongoing connection, suggesting that we had shared too much history to become complete strangers. She would occasionally share memories, apparently hoping to rebuild some kind of relationship, even if it couldn't be romantic. But I had no interest in maintaining any connection with someone who had demonstrated such a capacity for deception and betrayal, and I made it clear that our divorce represented the complete end of any relationship between us. Veronica's attempts to remain friends felt like another form of manipulation, an effort to maintain access to my life and attention even after she had forfeited any right to either through her choices. The experience of discovering Veronica's affair through her own text messages taught me important lessons about trusting my instincts when something feels wrong in a relationship, and about the importance of facing difficult truths rather than hoping that problems will resolve themselves through patience and effort. I learned that some betrayals are so fundamental that they reveal incompatibilities that can't be overcome through counseling, forgiveness, or renewed commitment. Veronica's affair hadn't been a momentary mistake, but a deliberate choice to live a double life. And someone capable of that level of deception wasn't someone who could be trusted with the vulnerability that marriage requires. The old iPhone I found in our garage had been intended to keep Veronica's secrets safe from discovery, but instead it had provided me with the clarity I needed to choose self-respect over false reconciliation. Sometimes the truth really is found in black and white, and once you see it clearly, you can't unsee it or pretend it doesn't matter. The printed text messages that I had posted throughout our house served as a silent confrontation that forced Veronica to face the reality of her own words and choices without being able to minimize their significance or control my reaction to them. Her own descriptions of our marriage and her affair had been more devastating than any accusations I could have made. Looking back now, I realized that finding that phone was actually a gift that saved me from continuing to invest in a relationship with someone who had already decided it wasn't worth her commitment or honesty. Veronica's secret communications had revealed her true feelings about our marriage and given me the information I needed to make an informed decision about our future. Veronica had thought I would fight for her when she discovered that her secrets had been exposed, but instead, I had simply walked away from someone who had already shown me exactly how much our marriage meant to her. The woman who had spent months describing our relationship with contempt in her private communications had no right to expect loyalty or forgiveness when her deception was finally revealed. The truth, as I learned that weekend in our garage, really can set you free, especially when it's written in someone's own words and can't be denied, minimized, or explained away. Sometimes the end of love comes not through dramatic confrontation, but through the quiet recognition that you deserve better than what someone has chosen to offer you. Thank you for watching.